I've been a widower for 6 years, and for most of that time I told myself I was fine. Fine meant eating cereal for dinner 3 nights a week. Fine meant watching the same hockey games my wife and I used to watch together, except now I sat on the left side of the couch because her side still felt like hers. Fine meant my daughter calling every Sunday at 7, and me saying not bad when she asked how I was doing, and both of us pretending that was enough. I met Lorraine at a Canada Day fundraiser for the food bank in Guelph. She was volunteering at the silent auction table, laughing at something a colleague said, and I remember thinking she had one of those laughs that filled a room without trying to. My friend Gordon nudged me. He'd been nudging me toward various women for 2 years. I'd been ignoring him for 2 years. That evening, for the first time, I didn't. We talked for 40 minutes about nothing important. The auction items, the weather that summer, a book we'd both apparently started but never finished. When I left, I realized I hadn't thought about my late wife once during that conversation. I didn't know if that meant I was healing or just distracted. Either way, I gave Lorraine my number before I walked out. What I didn't tell her that night, what I didn't tell her for quite a while, actually, was anything real about my financial situation. It wasn't deception, exactly. Or maybe it was. I'm still not entirely sure how to frame it. My wife and I had spent 31 years building something together. She was a high school principal. I'd run a small but steady plumbing supply business out of Cambridge that I eventually sold for more than either of us expected when I turned 62. We owned our home in Guelph outright. We had rental income from a duplex in Kitchener my wife had inherited from her parents, which I'd kept after she passed. My RRSP and TFSA were healthy. By most measures, I was comfortable. More than comfortable. But I'd also watched a colleague of mine, a decent man, divorced at 58, get taken apart over 3 years by a woman who'd come into his life very deliberately and left with a significant portion of what he'd spent his whole career building. He never saw it coming because he'd been too eager, too grateful to be chosen again at that age. I wasn't going to be that man. So when Lorraine asked what I did, I told her the truth, but not all of it. I said I was semi-retired, that I'd been in trade supply, that I kept busy with a little property management. I drove a 4-year-old Civic. I didn't mention the duplex generated enough each month, that I hadn't touched my pension since my wife died. I didn't mention the investment account. None of it came up, and I didn't bring it up. We dated for 8 months. They were good months. She was a dental hygienist, owned her townhouse in Waterloo, had a 23-year-old son named, well, she called him her boy, and I'll call him that too, who lived with her between semesters at Laurier. She was warm, practical, funny in a dry way I appreciated. She cooked well. She remembered things I mentioned in passing. She seemed, by every measure I could observe, to be a genuine person. My daughter was cautious. She was always cautious. It was her nature, had been since she was small. But she was especially careful about this. She came to dinner the one time I introduced them and was perfectly polite and perfectly non-committal afterward. On the phone the following Sunday she said, simply, "Dad, just don't rush." I told her I wouldn't. I meant it when I said it. We got engaged at Christmas. We were married the following April. A small ceremony in Elora, just family and close friends. Dinner after at a restaurant that overlooked the gorge. My daughter gave a toast that was warm and short and didn't quite reach her eyes. I noticed. I told myself she just needed time. We spent the first night at a bed and breakfast nearby. We'd talked about a trip. Maybe the Maritimes in the summer, maybe something further. Portugal had come up once, but nothing was booked. It didn't feel urgent. We were both past the age of needing a grand gesture. Or so I thought. It was the morning after our wedding, over coffee at the kitchen table of the house we'd been sharing for 2 months. We'd agreed she'd move into my place after the ceremony, that she first brought it up. She was scrolling her phone and she said, without looking up, "I've been thinking we should see a financial planner together." I said, "Sure, eventually. We're in no hurry." She put the phone down. "I think sooner is better. We need to think about combining things properly. The duplex income should be going into a joint account. It's cleaner that way." I looked at her. "We haven't really talked about the details yet." "I know," she said. "That's why I think we should. Soon." She smiled and picked up her coffee and moved on to something else, and I sat there with a feeling I couldn't immediately name. It wasn't alarm, not yet. It was more like a small, cold note played in a familiar song. Wrong key, barely noticeable, but wrong. That afternoon her son arrived. He'd been staying with a friend during the ceremony and the days around it, giving us space, which I'd appreciated. He came in with a hockey bag over one shoulder and went straight to the fridge without saying hello. When his mother introduced us properly, "You remember Harold's dad," she said, then caught herself and said my name. He glanced over, gave a nod, and went back to looking for something to eat. I told myself he was 23. 23-year-olds weren't always gracious. I'd been a difficult 23-year-old myself, or so I'd been told. But over the next 2 days, the 2 days immediately following our wedding, a pattern established itself with a speed that in retrospect I should have recognized as a signal. By the second evening, he was asking about the Wi-Fi password, then whether I had any objection to him having his girlfriend over on weekends, then whether there was room in the garage for his hockey equipment because the basement was, and I'm quoting him here, kind of cramped for storage. He said my name the way a teenager says a teacher's first name on the last day of school, technically permitted, but designed to communicate something. His mother didn't correct him. Not once. On the third day, she brought up the finances again. She'd apparently done some thinking overnight. She sat down across from me at the kitchen table, with the look of someone who'd rehearsed what they were going to say and was now delivering it, and she said that she thought it made sense, practically and tax-wise. She used the phrase tax-wise. For me to put the Kitchener duplex into both our names. Community property was simpler. Her accountant had mentioned it. Did I know her accountant? I should meet her accountant. I said I had my own accountant, a man I'd worked with for 11 years. She nodded like I'd said something mildly inconvenient. Still, she said, it would be worth a second opinion. I excused myself to take out the recycling. It was a Tuesday, not a recycling day. I stood in the driveway in the April cold for longer than the task required. My daughter called that night. I almost didn't pick up. I did. How's the first week? She asked. Interesting, I said. There was a pause. My daughter was good at pauses. She'd learned them from her mother, who'd been a woman of strategic silences. Dad, she said quietly, what does that mean? I didn't want to alarm her. I didn't want to say out loud what I was beginning to think because saying it would make it real, and making it real would mean I had to do something about it. So I said it was just an adjustment period. She let me off the hook because she's kind. But before she hung up, she said, you know you can call me anytime, right? Any hour. The following morning, a Saturday, I came downstairs early and found her son at the kitchen table with a laptop and what looked like a printed spreadsheet. When I asked what he was working on, he said, casually, like it was the most ordinary thing, that he was looking at what it would cost to finish the basement into a proper apartment. I stood very still. For storage, I said. He looked up. I mean for me to live in, permanently. Mom said it was probably fine. I went and made coffee and did not say what I was thinking. What I was thinking was this. 48 hours ago, I got married. In 48 hours, my new wife had proposed combining our finances, suggested transferring a rental property into joint ownership, declined to address her son's behavior once, and apparently told her son he could convert my basement into a permanent residence, without mentioning any of it to me. I called my accountant Monday morning, not her accountant, mine. I explained the situation as plainly as I could. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, the duplex is in your name alone? Yes. And your TFSA, your RRSP, she's not named on those? No. And she doesn't know the full picture of what you're worth. She knows I'm comfortable. She doesn't know the specifics. He said, carefully, I'd keep it that way for now. And I'd speak to a family lawyer before you do anything with the property. I called a lawyer that afternoon. She specialized in family law and had an office in Guelph. She was brisk and matter-of-fact in the way that good lawyers often are, and she walked me through what my situation actually looked like under Ontario law. Because we'd been living together for 2 months before the ceremony and were now legally married, certain protections were in play. But the duplex, because it predated the marriage, was not automatically a matrimonial home, and as long as I hadn't added her to the title, it remained mine in the event of a separation, provided we hadn't been married long enough for equalization to complicate things significantly. She said, how long have you been married? I said, 9 days. She paused just slightly. Then you still have options. What is it you want to do? I sat with that question for a long time after I hung up. I didn't want to believe I'd been wrong about her. 8 months is long enough to know a person, I'd thought. Long enough to know if someone is genuine. But I kept coming back to the speed of it. The financial planner the morning after our wedding. The duplex conversation on day 3, her son's spreadsheet on day 4. These weren't the natural conversations of two people building a life together. These were moves. And moves implied a game, and a game implied someone had been keeping score long before I realized we were playing. I thought about my daughter's toast, the warmth that hadn't quite reached her eyes. I thought about my late wife, and how she'd worked alongside me for 3 decades without ever once asking what anything was worth. She'd known everything anyway, of course. We'd built it together, all of it. But she'd never approached our life like it was an asset to be assessed. That had just never been who she was. I made a decision. I didn't confront. I didn't announce. I went to see my lawyer again, and I quietly, carefully, made sure everything that was mine was properly documented as mine. I updated my will, which needed updating anyway. I confirmed the duplex title was clean. I reviewed the beneficiary designations on my registered accounts. I did not add my wife to anything new. And then I waited. It took 3 weeks. She brought up the property transfer again at dinner one evening, with her son sitting at the table as though his presence were entirely natural in a financial conversation between spouses. She said she'd spoken to her accountant. She said there were real tax advantages to restructuring things as a household unit. She slid a piece of paper across the table, something her accountant had apparently prepared, a summary of some kind, and she said all I needed to do was speak to my own accountant about next steps. I looked at the paper, I looked at her, I looked at her son who was eating and not looking at either of us, with the studied casualness of someone pretending not to listen very hard. I said, I've already spoken to my accountant. She brightened. And? He advised me not to make any changes to my asset structure during the first year of the marriage. Standard practice, he said. Something about financial stability assessments. There was no such thing exactly, but it wasn't entirely a lie either. My accountant had told me not to change anything, and that was close enough. She didn't brighten anymore. She said, that seems overly cautious. I said, he's been my accountant for 11 years. I trust his judgment. The conversation moved on. But something shifted in the house after that. A coolness that hadn't been there before, subtle enough that it could be explained away as stress or adjustment, but I felt it. I'd been married long enough to know the difference between a person having a rough week and a person recalculating. The son started spending more time at his girlfriend's place. Possibly a coincidence. About 6 weeks after the wedding, she told me she wanted to talk. We sat in the living room and she said with a kind of manufactured calm that she wasn't sure this was working, that we'd moved too fast, that she thought we might want to consider a trial separation. I said, I'm sorry to hear that. She said she still cared about me. She said she hoped we could be mature about it. She said solicitor, which is a word people use when they want you to know they've already been to see one, had indicated there was a process for this that didn't need to be adversarial. I said, my lawyer and I have already spoken. I'm not worried. That was the first moment I saw something other than warmth on her face when she looked at me. It wasn't anger exactly. It was the specific expression of someone realizing that the thing they came for isn't there. She moved her things out over a weekend in late June. Her son took his hockey bag. The basement remained, as far as I know, unfinished. I sat in the kitchen that first evening alone and had a cup of tea and looked out at the backyard, which was my backyard, which my wife and I had planted with a mix of perennials and hostas, because she'd loved hostas and I'd loved watching her love things. My daughter calls at 7, like she always does. She's gone, I said. There was a pause. Not a strategic one this time, just a genuine one. The kind that means someone is choosing their words carefully because they care about you. Dad, she said, I'm sorry. I really am. Don't be, I said. You were right. She didn't say I told you so. She's not built that way. She just said, do you want me to come over this weekend? I said yes. She came on Saturday morning with groceries and her 2 kids, my grandchildren, and we made a large and ridiculous brunch that took too long and made too much mess. And afterwards we sat in the backyard and watched the kids chase each other between the hostas, and I thought about the word enough. How it gets a bad reputation, like it means settling, like it means giving up. But sitting there that afternoon, watching my grandchildren run in the garden my wife planted, with my daughter's coffee going cold beside me because she was too busy laughing to drink it, I thought maybe enough was the whole point. Maybe enough was everything. I'd spent a winter trying to fill a silence. I'd nearly handed over 30 years of careful living to fill it faster. What saved me, in the end, wasn't cleverness. It wasn't the lawyer or the accountant, though they helped. What saved me was the same thing my wife used to tell me when I was being stubborn about something. Slow down and listen to what you already know. I already knew. I'd known on the morning after our wedding when she looked at me over that coffee cup and started calculating. I just hadn't wanted to be right about it. Next time, if there is a next time, I'll listen the first time.